Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am joined by my brother-in-law, Preston. Preston, thank you for joining me.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And today we are talking about Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which was written by Philip K. Dick in 1968, and we are comparing it with the movie adaptation Blade Runner, directed by Ridley Scott, released in 1982.
And the one that we will be referring to specifically is the Final Cut edition.
Yeah. And when we get into the movie segment, I definitely want to talk about that because there are all of these different versions of the movie. And before getting into this one, I did cover A Scanner Darkly, which is also by Philip K. Dick. That was like one of the first episodes I did 2 years ago. And at the time, I was like, oh, and this isn't the last you'll be hearing of Philip K. Dick because so much of his work has been adapted. So I was expecting to be covering a lot of his work, including Blade Runner. And yet, through the last 2 years, I never covered anything else by him until now. So I don't know why, I just never got around to it. But Preston reached out to me wanting to cover this one, and so I was very excited and gave me an opportunity to finally cover another Philip K. Dick book. Before getting into this, I was curious, Preston, did you see the movie first or did you read the book first?
So I actually saw the movie first. I knew it was based on a book. At the time of my first viewing of the movie, I wasn't even aware that the book was called something completely different. I thought the book was Blade Runner. When I went to look up the book when I wanted to read it, I looked up Blade Runner, the book, and then it came up, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It took me a second to realize that that is what the movie is based on. So completely different title.
Yeah, and they're also very different. Like, they both have the same overview, where we have Rick Deckard, who is a bounty hunter, and he is tracking down these androids that have escaped Mars, because on Mars they're like kept as slaves and servants, and so they have escaped Mars and have come to Earth, and he is here to hunt them down. So that is where the book and movie are the same, but within the details it is very different, as we will get into. So beginning with the book, so just like a general book review, what did you think of this book?
So I think it was important to know about the context of why he wrote the book, because I think that that'll allow us to explore the comparison to the movie a lot better. So he actually wrote this book, and in an overview sense, he was really horrified. He had witnessed or read about the Nuremberg trials after World War II and just the human atrocities committed at that time. And he really got into thinking about how people are able to turn feelings off, what empathy really means. Is it something we're born with? Is it something that can essentially be beaten out of us by society? And so that was really his motivation for the books, and kind of separating these humans, which he's very careful to establish who is a human and who is an android in the book. It really allows this dichotomy to explore the feelings of a human versus the seemingly lack of feelings or empathy of an android. So as an overview, I think that that's where he comes, and that's what he means to explore.
Yeah, I did hear that like the Nazis like kind of inspired him. So.
Yeah, so he inspired by Nazis. He was absolutely horrified at because for many years, we knew that we were at war with Germany. We didn't know entirely the scope of kind of these, the ethnic cleansing, the human experiments, and just these war atrocities that were being committed. And he was horrified and disillusioned that a being could be capable of such a thing. We'd like to think that we're capable of these extreme acts of kindness, and he was hearing about these extreme acts of horrific things that humans were doing to other human beings.
Yeah, and along with that, like I talk about in A Scanner Darkly, Philip K. Dick also has like a past of drug abuse, and so I feel like that kind of comes through too, where there's definitely some like trippy scenes, especially with like when they're fusing with Mercer, which we'll get into. There's like some trippiness there, so I feel like that also played a part in this story. I also forgot to warn the listeners and viewers that there will be spoilers for both book and movie in this, so just getting that out there. But anyway, returning back to the book.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up drug abuse because, and I apologize, I forget the character's name in the book. In the movie, his equivalent is J.F. Sebastian. But in the book, the guy that
J.R.
kind of...
Isidore.
Isidore, yeah. He brings the androids in, and he's a deadhead. And he reminds me a lot of like a drug addict whose mind is burnt out. In the book, it's because of nuclear fallout and the effects of that. But when you said drug abuse, I was like, yeah, he kind of strikes me as like a completely burnt out drug addict kind of guy. It's interesting because as an author, Philip K. Dick is kind of the dark horse of sci-fi, when people talk about the ABCs of sci-fi, so you have A, Isaac Asimov, B, Ray Bradbury, C, Arthur C. Clarke, but then I would contend that there's D, Philip K. Dick as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm surprised again that I hadn't covered him a second time until now, because I really do love his writing, and I think he really like captures the trippiness and the confusion too in the book, in both A Scanner Darkly, which I will try not to reference that one too much, but as well as this one here, there's a few times where you're just like, wait, what? Like, what is going on? And I think the book is also harder to understand than the movie is. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this book. And I read it, but I also listened to it on audiobook, so I switched back and forth. And I thought the audiobook was really good, so I definitely recommend that to people. And yeah, I think there's just so much to like think about after finishing this book. Like, it stays with you because you're just trying to figure it out.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, I just love when a book can do that.
There's a purpose to all of his what you called the trippy, the psychedelic moments. They're purposeful. They're not just to shock or to
very intentional.
Empty space. Yeah, intentional.
And so we will get into the book this episode. Usually I kind of talk about them both simultaneously, but today we are going to be talking about the book first and then move on to the movie. So the first section of the book, we are introduced to Rick Deckard and his wife Erin, and we learn about mood organ. So that is how this book first starts out, is them talking about this mood organ, which is a machine that can make you feel certain emotions. And we also learn that the Andes, which androids, they also call them Andes in the book. So there are 6 of them that have escaped from Mars, and Deckard's bounty hunter, like higher up boss, has been shot by them. So now Deckard is in charge of catching the rest of them. And then also early on, we meet J.R. Isidore, who you mentioned, who is a chicken head, which is someone whose brain has been messed up from the radiation, and so he's more simple-minded, and he's not allowed to emigrate to Mars because of this handicap he has. And we are also introduced to Deckard's electric sheep, because caring for animals is a huge part of this book, and his real sheep died, and so it was replaced with an electric sheep. And people have electric animals, but they kind of try to keep it on the down low because they don't want to be judged by others for having an electric animal and not a real animal. Because yeah, empathy is a huge part of this book. Like, people show they have empathy by caring for an animal. And also, like, the Voight-Kamf test is all about animals, which I thought was interesting. So I definitely want to talk about the electric animal aspect to this. The questions aren't about how much do you care about your fellow humans, it's about how much do you care about animals, which I thought was interesting. So what did you think about that?
Well, I have a lot to say about that, actually, because the electric animals are kind of the almost like the Great Value brand, like the Walmart brand of having a real animal. And so I like that you said that people try to keep it secret. And as someone just, kind of internalizing it personally, as someone who came from kind of a more humble beginnings, wanting to fit in and wanting to like, oh, hey, I have this cool brand of clothes, but, it's never good enough. So then you just kind of stop talking about it. Like, you don't want people to notice. You want to just kind of fly in under the radar. And I almost saw the animals almost like name brand. Like, if you have a real animal, that's like having a Ferrari. And if you have a fake animal, that's like having a Geo Metro. They're both cars.
Yeah.
One is thought of a little better than the other. And so I think that what it is, and it makes an interesting point, that it's almost easier to be kind to like a lesser being than it is to be kind to your fellow man. And we see that in society even today. Not to be too heavy-handed about, societal commentary or anything, but it's almost easier to care about things that are far away from you than about things that are happening right in front of you.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the point that he's making with the animals.
And I also loved the start of this book where he and his wife are talking about this mood organ, because he wakes up and he has his dial to like waking up energetic or whatever, whereas his wife is kind of depressed. So he's trying to get her to dial a happier mood, and she's like, I don't want to dial a happier mood. And we also learned that Rick Deckard, like, there's a line where she says something about how like, you've always gotten more out of the mood organ than I ever did. So he really loves this mood organ that can control his moods and just tells him what to feel.
Yeah.
Whereas like when we get into the empathy boxes where they fuse with Mercer, Deckard has a hard time like getting that, and he just doesn't like doing it as much. So I thought that was interesting too, about how he loves being able to control his mood, and yet when he's in a good mood, he doesn't like being hooked up to the empathy box and sharing that good mood.
Yeah.
Because he's just like, but then I take on the bad mood of other people and I just want to keep this to myself, showing that maybe he's not that empathetic, even though that's the whole point, right?
Yeah. And when you said that about the wife wanting to feel more depressing feelings, it makes me think of like when I'm in a bad mood, I'll like listen to sad music to make myself sadder. And sometimes it's that feeling of wanting to feel over wanting to feel something positive, just knowing that you have a feeling of some sort.
Yeah, and when he asks her, like, because she says how she, like, scheduled a depression for later in that day, and he's like, why would you, yeah, and he was like, why would you do that? And she said that the other day, she was, like, programmed to feel a good mood. So while she was in this fake good mood, she, like, noticed the emptiness, because this is, like, a desolate, futuristic world.
Yes.
And so she noticed the emptiness, but she didn't feel bad about it. And she was like, I should be feeling bad about this. And so she purposefully, like, wants to feel bad. But yeah, and I think so many dystopian books like this talk about, you know, these synthetic moods, either through drugs or like a mood organ. And we definitely see that today too, where people don't want to feel negative emotions and they, you know, use substances or whatever, trying to trying to suppress any negative emotion the way Deckard
gloss
does.
over it almost. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then also to touch on the empathy boxes, which I mentioned. So we have this religious figure named Wilbur Mercer. And so people will hook up to an empathy box, and it's called like Fusion with Mercer, where they go on this journey with him where he climbs a mountain and you and he are like struck by rocks, and then you like die and go into this like tomb world, but then you and Mercer are resurrected only to do it all over again.
Yes.
And when you're in fusion with Mercer, you're joined by anyone else who is currently hooked up, and so you all share those emotions. So what did you think of just Mercerism and the empathy box?
I thought it was interesting also to add to that you could actually, if you're very intensely connected, sustain actual injuries based on being hit by the rocks. I do think it was interesting, and to just loosely based on a lot of religion is driven by maybe guilt or pain and things, a lot of religious thought, not everything. So to have this connected feeling, like you think in Christianity, we kind of mourn the death of Jesus Christ every Sunday and celebrate his resurrection. And so you see that parallel in Mercerism, where it's like we actually feel what it felt like on this journey going up the hill, and then we know what it's like to die and be risen again. So it's sacramental in nature, and the fact that it's a community experience. They're all seeking to feel one single feeling. That was an interesting parallel for me.
Yeah. Before moving on to the next section, I also did want to talk about Isidore, because I thought he was a really interesting character. And we learned that he works for a veterinarian that takes care of electric animals.
Yeah.
Again, going back to how people care more about animals, like his boss, we see that he like treats Isidore really poorly. It doesn't have any empathy for him. Even though his boss is like going blind from the radiation, he still looks down on Isidore because he's simple-minded. And I think Isidore is like the best example in this whole book of someone who is the most empathetic, because Pris, one of the androids, goes into a building and then Isidore finds her. And even when he knows her and Roy and Irmgard are androids, he still cares about them and doesn't want them to be hurt. And so I just thought he was a really interesting character. So what did you think about him?
And so just as a quick side note, I know we'll come back to it, but back to Mercerism just real quick. The androids are antagonistic towards Mercerism because they don't understand. It's too complex a feeling, which I thought was really interesting, which comes back into Isidore. Yeah, he's almost too simple-minded to understand hatred.
Yeah, kind of like androids are too smart for their own good, but then Isidore is just too dumb, I guess.
Yes.
To put it bluntly.
And just that he almost immediately is willing to take them all in, and then is shocked by their behavior in many ways. Yeah. That he doesn't understand when they find the spider, which he's like, wow, a spider! Like, you know, it's this rarity to find this living spider, and the androids pull it apart because they don't understand it's a machine to them. It's another just biomechanical
and they're doing
machine.
It like almost like a science experiment. Like, let's see if it can walk with only 4 legs or whatever.
Yeah, and there wasn't. I didn't get any like sadistic like torturing of an animal so much as, like you said, they
like
were
just
trying
curious.
They're curious, almost like a child breaking something to see how it works.
So, but moving on to the next section of this book. So Rick Deckard is sent to the Rosen Association, and this is where the androids are made. And he tests the Voight-Kamf test, which, you know, shows whether or not someone is human. And he tested on Rachel, and he proves she's an android, but then they're like, no, actually she's human. But then he like asks her another question, and turns out they were trying to trick him, and she actually is an android.
Yeah, that part was a little weird for me too. Like, it's like, oh, LOL, JK, she's human. No, never mind, she's an android. You were right.
Yeah,
like,
you got us.
Okay.
Yeah. And she made it seem like she didn't realize she was an android, but then later on when he meets up with her, she talks about her past doings as an android. So it's like, so was she lying that she didn't know? So I feel like there's some confusion there. But after meeting with Rachel and the Rosen Corporation, he then returns to San Francisco, where this is based. He goes to the opera house to find another android named Luba Luft, who is an opera singer. And when he goes, he tries to do the Voight-Kamf test on her when she calls the cops, and he is picked up by a bounty hunter, and yet he doesn't know this guy and this guy doesn't know him, and then he's taken to like this other police headquarters. And when he's like, why aren't we going to that location? They're like, that hasn't been used in like 50 years. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so what did you think of this whole section where like suddenly like as the reader, I was like, wait, is he delusional? Like, is he an android? Like, what is going on right now?
Yeah, so I really liked it, and going back into the references to World War II, Rosen is a Yiddish Jewish last name, and I thought it was interesting that he kind of threw that in as kind of a, Rachel is the one being experimented on.
And Rachel is also considered a Jewish name.
Yeah,
maybe not in
yes,
today's time.
It's like a biblical name.
Yeah.
Rachel is a biblical name from the Hebrew times. And so I think the character of Rachel, and we'll get to her in the film, she's one of my favorite in the film. In the book, she's a little different. She kind of does embody that femme fatale trope, if you will. And so she's interesting, the execution of the Voight-Kamf test, and I do think in the book it is important that it firmly establishes that Deckard is human because he's able to pass the test. He takes the test on himself. I don't remember if it's in this section or a little later on. And so the fact that we were armed with that knowledge, and then like you said, the alternate bounty hunters taking him to the alternate thing, it did make me question it. That's kind of started to sow the seeds of doubt, where it's like, okay, well, is he the villain? Has he gone rogue? Is he a rogue bounty hunter? And then when you found out, or I'm okay saying what the police station actually is, so you find out that it's actually like a fake police station that the androids made as kind of their like a little hiding base, so they could be familiar with the operations of the bounty hunters and kind of control that.
Yeah, so did you like that reveal, or were you disappointed that there wasn't something more? Like, were you disappointed that it didn't show that, like, oh, it turns out Rick is delusional, or it turns out that Rick is an android? Were you disappointed it didn't go that route? I
think disappointed's not a good word. I do think that it subverted my expectations, which isn't always a bad thing. I thought it was an interesting choice. I'm sure there's a deeper symbolism in it. That's not one that's clicked for me just yet. It's something that I still would need to think about. Other than the fact that the androids really attempt in many ways to mimic humans. That's almost their entire function, is like attempting to fool the humans into thinking they're humans. And we come to that with Buster Friendly and his friendly friends.
Right.
A little later.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And then when he's at this other police station, so the guy in charge is named Garland. We find out Garland is an android and he dies. But there's another bounty hunter there named Phil Resch. And so Phil Resch and Deckard leave together. He thinks that Phil Resch is an android because Garland told him, like, oh, that guy's an android. And Phil Resch is also just very cold, and he seems to like killing androids and feels no remorse. But also Phil Resch also starts to doubt whether he's human or not, because he's like, wait, this is a fake police station? Like, but I've been working here for 3 years. Like, do I have false memories? And if I have false memories, that means I'm an android. He's like, but then I have a squirrel, and I love this squirrel, and I take such good care of it, so how could I be an android? And so I really enjoyed seeing him as he has this, like, inner turmoil about whether or not he's an android. And we find out that he...
crisis.
Yeah, and we find out that he is a human, which is a relief to Phil Resch, but then Deckard is confused the fact that Phil Resch is a human, because he's like, what? But he's so cold and heartless. Like, how could he be human? And Deckard starts to feel sympathy for Luba Luft, who they end up killing. Resch ends up killing her. And so he's like, I'm like feeling sympathy for androids, and yet Resch is able to kill them, no problem. So then it causes Deckard to have kind of an existential crisis here.
Yes. Yeah, and it does, I think that this is beginning... It goes into the main point of the book, where it's like, just because you are physically a human, are you automatically then an empathetic being? What does it cause to, like you said, he was cold against the androids. It was professional. It's just a machine, and when the machine doesn't work, you shut the machine down. And was his logic. And it really comes into that question of, like, what does it actually mean to be human? Also,
early on, back to the beginning of the book with his wife Erin, she says something about how he murders people, and he's like, it's not people, it's just androids. And she says something like,
them.
Yeah. And she's like, yeah, just those poor Andes. And she feels sympathetic towards the androids.
Which I can understand. I tell my Alexa, please and thank you. So, like...
Yeah. And I do think that's interesting too, which kind of going on a different tangent. Like in today's day and age, we do have AI, you know, with Siri and Alexa, but also there's that Sophie robot, which has like very human-like emotions. And so if in our day and age, if we started to have AI and robots that could feel, that seemed human, like, is it heartless to treat them poorly? Or, you know, they are just robots, so does it not matter? And so just that moral gray area, it would be kind of interesting to deal with in real life.
Yeah, it's that uncanny valley of, because something looks or acts or speaks or sounds like a human, am I then required to treat it with humanity?
Yeah. And so getting back to this next part of the book, so he has killed Luba Luft. He returns home. Also, when he was feeling sympathetic towards Luba Luft, Phil Resch tells him, like, you know, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just sex. You're just lusting after that female android, so just have sex with one, and then just you'll be able to continue killing them, no problem. And so he returns home. Also, he buys a goat during this time, a live goat.
A live Nubian goat, yeah.
Yeah. And he returns home and he just wants to call it a day. However, his boss is like, you know, the three other androids are in this abandoned building. You have to go get them tonight when they're not suspecting it. And Rachel had earlier offered to come and help him, but he had turned her down. But now he's like, you know, maybe I should have sex with Rachel and that'll help me. And so he goes to a hotel room, he calls up Rachel, and he has her meet him there. And then she tells him that she will help him and she will kill Pris, which a big part of the book is that Pris is the same model as Rachel, so they look identical.
Yes.
And she's like, it's going to be too hard for you to kill Pris, so I'll go with you and I'll kill Pris. But before we do that, we'll have sex. And then the sex scene was pretty weird, I thought, because multiple times we are told that Rachel, Deckard is very attracted to her. But what's weird is how many times we hear that her body is like a pre-teen's body, like not fully developed, and yet she has the face of a woman. And it's like, why does Philip K. Dick feel the need to mention this so much? Like, that just seems super cringy, and that was just really weird in the book.
Yeah, so. And I was trying to, I guess, make it better in my own mind by imagining maybe it was like a gymnast, like a fully grown woman, but who was petite or something like that. And I guess that's how I maybe blocked it out or justified it in my mind. But it is creepy a little bit, and it's really the sexual aspect of it, and edit out anything that is going to get you demonetized or anything like that. I won't get graphic, but is that, you know, from an empathetic standpoint, sex creates life. It improves communication between two people. Like, it can be all these positives, but at the same time, and you think of, you know, some of the atrocities that happened in World War II and really throughout all of human history, it can also be a very demeaning act, and it can be dehumanizing to people. And that's kind of what I took away from Phil was, hey, if you objectify them, if you treat them like your object that you can use whenever you want, then it's easier to not think of them as human and to kill them. And so, yeah, the description of her being young and things like that, yeah, a little weird.
Yeah, and she's like, you know, she consents to have sex. She is drinking, but she seems very down for it. And afterwards, Deckard is suddenly like, oh, I love you, and I would run away and marry you if you weren't an android. And also, she only has a 4-year lifespan, so he can't really run away and marry her because she's gonna die in 2 years. But then at this moment, Rachel, as they're driving, she reveals to him, like, you know, actually, I purposefully had sex with you, and I was manipulating you because I have had sex with a lot of bounty hunters, and after I have sex with them, because of that connection, they are no longer able to retire androids. And so he is just totally thrown off by this change in her. And he says he's going to kill her, and she is just very accepting, like, okay, well, you know, like, shoot me in the neck.
Yeah.
But then he's not able to kill her, and he just kicks her out of the car. So what did you think of this switch where suddenly we find out that, you know, Deckard thought he was kind of in control and it was his idea to have sex? But then we find out that she was manipulating him.
That it was really part of her programming, almost.
Yeah.
That it was a defense mechanism that was built into her. Yeah, I do think it's interesting because it flips the script and it turns on its head the things I just said about dehumanizing. She really brought it back to him to where Phil is saying, yeah, have sex with them. It'll dehumanize them, make them easier to kill. She establishes this connection, which to me, it points out that it was actually more real than anything he could be programmed in to his mood organ. You know, us this like actual, what he felt almost like was a human connection, and he can't do it. It cancels out the original sentiment.
Yeah. And then also, so in this moment, like Rachel is revealed to be cold and heartless. And at the same time, we go back and forth between the androids with JR Isidore, and this is when they're taking the legs off the spider. So Isidore, he had sensed a coldness from like Roy and Pris, but he still really liked having them around. But then at the same moment, Isidore and Deckard are both experiencing the coldness of the androids at the same time, and just kind of fully realizing their lack of humanity, I guess, in some sense. And so yeah, Deckard, he goes to this abandoned building and he sees Isidore outside, because Isidore, so he drowned the spider to stop them from hurting it, but then he goes and fuses with Mercer, and while he's fused with Mercer, Mercer hands him a new spider that has like been resurrected. And so he takes this new spider and releases it into the wild, and this is when Deckard comes across him, and he tries to get Isidore to help him retire the androids, basically, like to tell him what room they're in, but Isidore doesn't want to. And we hear how like Deckard, like this is going to be really tough, like no one has retired 6 of these Nexus 6s in one day, like this is crazy. And Pris looks exactly like Rachel, she's gonna be the toughest one to kill, but then he kills them so quickly, and it's
they
very
go
easily
out
done.
really quickly in the book. It's not a hard job.
And before he kills them, he's visited by like Mercer, like a visitation by Mercer, and he tells him that like Pris is hiding around the corner, and Deckard asks him, because he's been struggling, like, is what I'm doing wrong? And he asks Mercer, like, is it wrong to kill androids? And so Mercer tells him, you'll be required to do wrong no matter where you go. It is the basic condition of life to be required to violate your own identity. At some point, every creature which lives must do so. It is the ultimate shadow, the defeat of creation. This is the curse at work, the curse that feeds on all life, everywhere in the universe. So Mercer tells him this, and then he goes and kills the androids.
What I thought was interesting, because, and I keep wanting to say JF Sebastian, I'm sorry, Isidore wants to, they watch the expose with Buster Friendly and the Friendly Friends, who turns out Buster Friendly is an android as well, who had been running this 24-hour TV show called Buster Friendly and His Friendly Friends. And they do an expose on William Mercer, and that he wasn't ever a prophet at all, that he was an actor, and there was like a series of videos that this company had done and hired him as an actor. And I thought it was interesting that it makes very little difference to the humans, that it doesn't really hurt his religion at all. There's this expose, people still like how it feels. Deckard still has kind of a somewhat spiritual experience with him, despite the fact that it was all fake the whole time.
And that again goes, like, it makes me think of how humans are so emotionally, like, we make decisions based on emotions, where androids don't have emotions, they're just very logical. So they would think, like, once Mercer is proved to be false, how could anyone continue to follow him? But they do.
Very black and white. And I do think, I thought a lot about this, how antagonistic the androids are towards religion in general, just because they don't get it. There's not really any hatred or ulterior motive. They just don't understand.
They're incapable of using an empathy box.
It's too complex.
And then after he kills the androids, from here, Deckard, like, I don't want to say he goes crazy, but he, like, drives out into, like, the Oregon desert area. And then he starts climbing up a mountain, and he's hit by a rock, and he feels like he has become Mercer, and he has become, like, permanently fused with Mercer. And when he comes down from the mountain, he's talking with a lady at work, and she tells him, like, you look just like Wilbur Mercer. And he's like, I am Mercer. And then he finds a toad out in the wilderness, and a toad is, like, a highly spiritual, prized animal in Mercerism.
It had thought to be completely extinct.
And so this is this big deal, and he returns home, and he's like just super depleted from everything, and he's excited to show his wife this toad, and she reveals that it's electric. And then after this, he says he's disappointed, but then he says it'll be okay. He shook his head as if trying to clear it, still bewildered. The spider Mercer gave the chicken head Isidore. It was probably artificial too. But it doesn't matter. The electric things have their lives too, paltry as those lives are. And so he seems to just come to terms with it, and then he goes to bed. So what did you think of this ending?
Well, I thought it was interesting because prior to that, Rachel actually comes by his house. And kills the living goat. Just kind of as a middle finger to him, to kind of provoke him a little more. So he has this defeat that he was able to afford his wife something really, really nice that then his kind of paramour comes and takes away. And then, he finds this toad thinking, hey, this is an even better replacement. Turns out that, yes, physically it's fake, but then once again, it comes back to the overarching theme of the book, is something that is artificially created. If it creates a certain reaction in you, whether it's Mercerism, whether it's owning an animal, does that then give it living value.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting too because earlier in the book when Isidore is at work, this woman has a cat and Isidore thinks it's a robotic cat, but turns out it was a live cat, but it died. And so they call her and they tell her, you know, like, your cat died, but we can make an electric replica that will look just like it. And she's like, oh, my husband loved that cat so much and I don't want to tell him it died, so I'll just do the replica. And they tell her, like, you know, just so you know, your husband will probably notice it's fake though, because you know, when you're up close, you can tell it's not real. And she's like, oh, like, he loved the cat so much more than anything, but he never got close to it and he didn't take care of it, so he won't notice it's a fake.
Yeah.
And so I thought, like, that was just weird. Like, he loves it, but he never even gets close to it.
But he didn't care. Yeah.
Yeah, and then this is mirrored in the end when Erin calls, like, an electric vet about the toad, and she's like, you know, I want to really take care of this electric toad because my husband, you know, he cares more about it than anything else. So what did you think of those two similarities?
I think that if you go into their relationship as husband and wife, it, like you said, it mirrors the relationship between an animal and a human, in that he has this deeply spiritual, what we're led to believe, real experience. It wasn't artificial and that it wasn't programmed into him. In Oregon, he comes home, tells his wife's kind of like, okay, and by the way, your toad is fake. You know, so it's like he, like, came home having in some ways experienced God, what they understood to be God. He comes home, tells his wife about it, and she's like, it was fake the whole time. And it's really that disconnect that you see, that the humans treat each other the same way they treat their electric animals, where it's like, this toad is fake, your experience is fake, I really don't care, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
I did want to get into the title. Actually, there were a few things I wanted to get into. First of all, in the book, this takes place in January of 2021. So this was written in I always forget if it's 68 or 69, but
I believe it's 68. And in the original draft, it was actually 2019. It was the same as in the movie, and then he updated it to 2021.
But I think it's interesting that he made it not like some crazy distant time. He made it not that far off. So do you think that was on purpose?
He made it last year.
Yeah. So do you think Philip K. Dick, was that his way of saying, like, we aren't that far off from becoming like this? That's how I kind of interpret it. Because he could have chosen to have it take place in the year 4000. But he chose a time not too distant.
I agree. You know, we had just come off of 2 world wars, the Korean War, and in the middle of the Vietnam War. We're in a Cold War with Russia. Nuclear technology is being really ramped up. The destruction of the Earth as we know it takes place during World War Terminus. And basically the entire world gets nuked, which was a very real threat. You know, we were in this Cold War where we would establish nuclear bases, and then the Russians would, and then we would build more, and then so it was like this arms race. And it really did seem like a logical end to the world, I'm sure, to someone as skeptical as Philip K. Dick in 1968. Yeah, I'm sure he thought, by at least the year 2021, we're gonna have fried ourselves somehow. So it's a good thing nothing happened in, like, 2019 that, like, shut the world down or anything else. Would be really weird. Really eerie.
And then onto the title. So what do you think of this title? How do you interpret it?
Do androids dream of electric sheep?
When I first read this title, I thought of like counting sheep when you're trying to fall asleep and dream. Yeah. But then there's a quote later where Rick Deckard is thinking and he says, "Do androids dream?" Rick asked himself. Evidently, that's why they occasionally kill their employees and flee here. A better life without servitude. Mm-hmm. So then it seems like it's talking about, do androids dream? Like, do they dream of something better? Well, and I'll have you share what you think it means, because I have more I want to elaborate on with that.
I came to the same conclusion that I imagined an android counting electric sheep to fall asleep. But I do think, much like it's established very early on, that kind of the pinnacle of human consumerism in this era is to own a live sheep. So it's asking, hey, well, do androids, is the pinnacle of their existence is to have an electric sheep? Is that their dream? You know, to own that thing of value to them. Yeah,
and I had the same thought. That's what I was going to say. Mm-hmm. And also, like, by androids, like, do they dream of electric sheep? Like, that's what they would rather have than a live sheep.
Because it's like them.
And it's like, but does that mean they have a lesser dream because they want an electric one, not a live one?
Yeah.
But, yeah, when I first heard the title, so I first read this book actually in 2017, but at the time, like, I was like, that was confusing, and I didn't really spend too much time thinking about it, just moved on. So I liked coming back to it for this show because it gave me the opportunity to really try to figure it out. And yeah, back in 2017, the title, I didn't really try to figure it out, and I was just like, just kind of a weird title. But thinking about it more, like, I think it's a really cool title. So I like it.
I agree. Oh, no, I was going to say, and when you said it's confusing, that's kind of just the world of Philip K. Dick. Like, trying to figure out and understand even Man in the High Castle, which is an adventure story. But then it's like, okay, well, some of this was on a film, but so some of it wasn't real, but some of it's from a different, so it's like, that's kind of his style, is to make things almost confusing on purpose.
Yeah, definitely. But okay, so that wraps it up on our book section for now. So moving on to the movie.
Yes.
Also, I didn't really look up any movie trivia, so if you have movie trivia, feel free to share that.
It's your lucky day.
Yeah. And so this is like my second or third time seeing the movie. I think I saw it around 2010, and then I watched it again in 2017. But honestly, from watching it in 2017, it didn't leave much of an impression on me. So coming back to around this time, I was like seeing it, it felt brand new because there was so much of it I had forgotten. Yeah, I guess basically what I'm saying is I don't love this movie. Like, I think the graphics are really cool, but things with the plot, like, they simplify it. They get rid of Mercer, they get rid of electric animals and empathy. So I like that they had it be more focused, but I feel like the plot is lacking in some ways. But I know you love the movie, so I'm excited to hear you talk more about it.
It is one of my favorite films.
Yeah.
I'm actually, one of my next tattoos is going to be of Rachel as depicted in the film, not in the book.
Nice.
So Sean Young's character.
Yeah.
But yeah, I absolutely love this film. It's one of my favorites. Philip K. Dick, before he passed away, actually was able to see the first 20 minutes of the film and commented that it matched his vision of the world around, like, so that he approved of kind of the artistic vision of the film.
Yeah. And even though I have my complaints with some of the storyline, it is just like a great aesthetic. And even though it's the 80s, like, it holds up, and they filmed it using miniatures, I think, so it looks great. And so the costumes are really cool.
And I remember you covered another Ridley Scott film a couple months ago, and you talked about pacing. And I really think, so he's a master of sets, kind of like what you said. He was able to use the miniatures. His background was in set design before he became a director, and that's why all of his shots are always so beautiful in almost every film he does. You mentioned, I think it was in House of Gucci, you said although it was a slow film, the pacing was done really well, that you never felt like it was a slow film. And I do feel like that there are these kind of like drawn out long shots with the Vangelis music playing in the background that sounds like, like there was a time that I've watched it several times in preparation for this, like it was late at night and like the music was like so soothing that I was like dozing off, like because it had these, long shots of the car flying into the Tyrell building with the synth music and everything. So there is a very 80s aesthetic to it, an early 80s aesthetic to it. So yeah, that's
and to talk about Ridley Scott just a bit more, I think he's a fantastic director, and he's also one of those directors where he's just so diverse, because he did House of Gucci, he did Matchstick Men, which I covered, he did the Alien. I think he didn't do all of the Alien movies, but he did the first one.
Alien. He might have done Aliens. I don't remember.
And also, have you seen Prometheus, which is like a prequel that he directed in 2012?
Yes, I did. I saw it, I think around when it came out. I don't remember a whole lot of it.
Certain aspects of Blade Runner actually made me think of Prometheus, which we can get into, but I love Prometheus.
I would say, I'm actually glad you brought that up, because Alien and Prometheus are both set in the same universe as Blade Runner.
Oh, interesting.
So Ridley Scott has said they're all set in the same world. Blade Runner is just what's happening on world, and then they make several references to off-world. Go to the off-world colonies. Roy Batty talks about his battles off-world. All of those things. So Alien and Prometheus were all happening in the stars while the events of Blade Runner were going on.
Yeah.
And I wish that Sigourney Weaver would have passed by Rick Deckard, or vice versa, where they're like, oh hey, that would have been cool. But anyway.
Yeah, and not to jump ahead, but I think my favorite things with the movie are like just the visuals and the aesthetic going on, as well as Roy Batty, which I feel like that's pretty universal. Everybody just loves.
I love Roy Batty. And Harrison Ford is a wonderful actor. He owned the 80s, every great movie that you can think of in the 80s, Star
Harrison
Wars, Indiana Jones, Air Force One, the Tom Clancy films, he was in everything in the 80s and early 90s. This one often gets overlooked, but it's such a unique role for him because he's usually a very suave, in control guy. He's trying to figure things out this whole time. He's a little confused the whole time. He doesn't want to be there. He's at the beginning, it's established he's retired, he's divorced, he kind of lives a lonely life. It's a very un-Harrison Ford role that he owns and does very well.
Not put together at all.
Yeah.
Meaning the Rick Deckard is just not put together.
Rick Deckard, correct.
And yeah, to get started, so the movie has the same premise, although like you said, Rick Deckard here is retired and his boss like forces him to come back, and he has this fellow bounty hunter, which in the movie they're not called bounty hunters, they're called Blade Runners.
Blade
and so
Runners.
Gaff is this fellow Blade Runner that kind of joins him. Early on, they go to the Tyrell Corporation, so it's called Tyrell, not Rosen.
And just real quick, it is established that they're part of a police unit. They're not like these kind of like off-the-cuff rogue bounty hunters. They're actually as part of the established government in this universe. Yeah.
Yeah. In the movie, it is similar where he tests Rachel and he finds out she's an android, but in the movie, usually it takes like 30 questions from the Voight-Kamf to determine if someone is an android. But Rachel, because she is such a high-level android, which in the movie they're called replicants, he had to ask her like over 100 before it was found out.
Yes.
And in the movie, Rachel for sure did not know she had been an android, and so she is very distraught over this realization.
Yeah, and so the Voight-Kamf test is interesting because the film is established with a Voight-Kamf test, and it really shows how condescending the test and the Blade Runners are. So Leo's the first person depicted as getting the test. He's obviously scared, and even as a human, I think if a government guy came in and is like, hey, I'm going to ask you questions about where you live and questions about your mom and all of these things, like I would be a little agitated too. There's a line I love where he goes, it's established that not everyone has seen certain animals because animals are going extinct. And he goes, you see a tortoise on your back, and the guy's like, what's a tortoise? And he's like, have you ever seen a turtle? And Leo's like, yeah. He's like, well, it's a turtle. And then Leo goes, I've never seen a turtle. And then he goes, but I know what you mean. He obviously sticks out like a sore thumb, but he's trying so hard to like fit in and be like, oh, I how do you do, fellow kids?
Yeah. And then did you have any thoughts on when he goes to the Tyrell Corporation?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple fun facts of the film. The guy who plays Eldon Tyrell couldn't see out of those giant glasses he wears, so they would actually hold up banners of his lines. So when he's kind of looking off the distance, although almost as he's like this like ethereal genius, he's actually like just trying to see his lines. But it works in the film. Yeah. I love the presentation of Rachel. Theatrical cut, it's established that the owl, that's her pet owl, is real. They actually change it in all other versions of the movie to it being a fake owl, which makes more sense in the context of the film.
Yeah.
And so she comes, she's kind of all business. She asks Deckard, like, hey, have you ever accidentally killed a human by mistake? And he says, absolutely not. And she says, yeah, but that's a real possibility, correct? And then that's when he kind of shows that coldness of like, hey, if a machine works, that's not my job. When a machine doesn't work, that's my job. And so I loved that he thought she was human. She thought she was human. Dr. Tyrell even says like, hey, I want to see it work on a human before I show you a replicant. And so just that kind of that surprise at the end as the questions, and it's established that like it's this barrage of questions, almost endless, about animals a lot, but also kind of about her sexuality too, which I thought was an interesting thing to add, because in the book, the Voight-Kamf test was almost completely about animals.
Well, that was a question in the book where it starts out being like, your husband has a picture of a naked woman, but the whole point is that the naked woman is on a bearskin rug.
Yeah.
And so if the person focuses on the rug or the woman, like that kind of shows if they're an android. So in the book, she has the line where she's like, are you asking if I'm a lesbian or, a replicant, whatever.
Yeah.
And so they kind of have that line in the movie as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so just like Rachel is she's, to me, a lot more compelling of I like her more, I guess, in the movie. I want to root for her more than I did in the book, where she just seemed very cold and manipulative the whole time. And I like her dynamic of she's in it thinking she's a human. Everyone in the room other than Tyrell thinks she's a human, and kind of that shock that she feels, and it comes on later on, of this like it destroys her whole world. And all of her sense of morality and everything, she just does not, she questions everything. Yeah.
And we'll return to Rachel, but we have the replicants, so Pris and Roy. They also have, like, the snake lady, who is kind of the Lubaluth equivalent, who he kills.
Yes. Her name is Zora?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Uh-huh. And then Leo.
Right, yeah. Which, you mentioned the owl, which is fake. And in the movie, she has the snake, and he's like, is that a real snake? And she's like, if I could afford a real snake, I wouldn't be here. Yeah. And so it's interesting that the movie references electric animals, but it isn't as big of a deal in the book, obviously. And also, in the movie, the Voight-Kamf test is about animals, but they don't really give us the context the movie had about why it's about animals. So I thought it was interesting they kept the questions the same without explaining it as much as the book had.
Yeah.
But in the book, Pris had gone to Isidore's house, or at the same building he was in, and it was just kind of random, like she hadn't sought him out. Whereas in the movie, Pris and Roy specifically seek out the Sebastian guy because he works for the Tyrell Corporation. And so they're using him so that they can meet Tyrell.
Yeah, Roy finds it out from Chew, the guy who makes the eyeballs, and Chew doesn't really know anything other than JF Sebastian can get them closer to. So it kind of, while Deckard is investigating the replicants are investigating the nature of their own being.
Yeah.
You know. So another little piece of movie trivia there, the actress who plays Zora primarily got the role because she owned a pet snake and was comfortable handling it.
I saw that. Yeah. I didn't know that that's why she got hired, but I did see that was like her own snake, so I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he ends up killing her, and then at some point later, Leo almost kills him, but then Rachel shows up, and she shoots Leo and saves Deckard. She had also been like hiding at Deckard's apartment at one point, but he just kind of brushes her off. But then she shows up again and saves him, if I'm remembering the timeline right.
Yeah, so she shows up actually the day after the Voight-Kamf test, because Dr. Tyrell asks her to leave the room and they discuss her being a replicant, but he mentions she's beginning to suspect, and she goes to his house and she's like, so I'm not a replicant because I have these memories, and Deckard is actually able to like literally list all her memories, and he'd be like,
yeah,
they're from Dr. Tyrell's niece. They're not your memories. They've been implanted in you, which the police chief establishes that they're given these fake memories because they were finding that the replicants with only a 4-year lifespan placed with no other context would freak out. They wouldn't know. So to make them more relatable to their human companions. And if you listen carefully, there's a lot of like background things in this film that like, so there's that speaker going on with the geisha girl is on the screen. And it says, like, go to off-world, you will have the perfect companion in a replicant. Because replicants are legal off-world. They're just illegal to be on Earth. You know, so you see these life that they then implant memories into so it can make them more relatable to humans, so you don't have that uncanny valley effect. Rachel was just, like, the most advanced of the Nexus 6 replicants. Yeah. And then he tries to tell her, which I thought was interesting because we joked about it with the flip-flop of, like, in the book, like, oh, she's a human, no, she's a replicant, no, she's a human, you're just kidding, you know, and it like flip-flops. Deckard's the one who actually tries that on her and it doesn't work. He goes, hey, like, I was just joking, that was a really bad joke, I'm really sorry, you are a human. And by that time, she's like, well, you know all my memories, like, you're obviously lying to me. The other thing I think was interesting, and maybe this is better for ending, but I'll tease it now, is that it's never fully established whether or not Deckard is a replicant or not, because he has a lot of human qualities, but he also has, like, Leo was obsessed with pictures, and when you go into Deckard's house, he has pictures everywhere. They're on his piano, they're on, you know, so it's like these like little clues, like, maybe is he a replicant? I don't know, you know, and we can talk about that later, but yeah.
Yeah, which, just to talk more about that, because that's something I read online where they're like, oh, I love the movie because, you know, in the book, Deckard is clearly human. But in the movie, you know, maybe he's a replicant.
It's ambiguous.
And whenever I read that, I'm so confused because I was like, where in the movie do they suggest he's a replicant? So I, like, don't see that, and I'm confused when people say that. But so I guess people who have watched the movie more can notice where that is hinted.
In the original draft, Ridley Scott thought it would be cool to make him a replicant, to be like, hey, you've been fighting your own kind this whole time. Harrison Ford did not like that, and so there was on set this consistent battle of like, Ridley Scott would ask him to do things that kind of made him hint that maybe he was a replicant, and Harrison Ford would not, which actually just adds to the ambiguity of it.
Yeah.
Another commenter said, if you're concerned as to whether or not Deckard is a replicant, you've missed the point of the film. Which I can understand and I can get behind that. I do think that it is more powerful, and we'll talk about the end because I have a lot to say about the ending. But the fact that Deckard, a human, was taught humanity by the replicants, I think is a more powerful thing than to be like, oh, he was a replicant the whole time. So, for terms of storytelling, I'd like to think he was a human, just because that makes his narrative a lot more powerful. So, but yeah, there are these little hints. He's obsessed with pictures, just like Leo is. So, maybe it's your replicant, you know, or is Leo just more human than we thought? You know, Tyrell says, our motto is more human than human, you know, so.
And then to continue with Rachel a bit, and then we'll move on to the replicants. But so kind of jumping around, because like I said, I'm skipping the replicant part for now. But Rachel and Deckard also have a sex scene in the movie. Mm-hmm. But this one, like the book scene was kind of weird, but this one is uncomfortable too because at the start of it, he's kissing her and she clearly is like trying to turn him away or turn him down. And then she tries to run away by going out the door and he like slams the door shut.
Yeah.
And then he like pushes her up against a wall and is like forcing himself on her. And he's telling her what to say, like, tell me to kiss me. Like, tell me you want me.
Yeah.
And so, but it's played as if it's supposed to be romantic. So I was like, are we supposed to believe he's in love with her? Because this is like such an uncomfortable scene. And it's like he's just like assaulting her.
At its best, the consent is ambiguous, which is, I mean, it was the 80s, so maybe some of it is that.
Yeah.
Not to talk poorly about past generations, but I mean, you know, we're a different era now than we were back then.
Yeah.
I do see it. I think that it was necessary to the film to show at this point he almost wanted her to react as a human would, and like, hey, like if it was a replicant that was built to be my companion and built for my physical needs, then she would do exactly what I said and do exactly what I wanted her to. And it's almost that intensity of like, tell me you're a replicant, so you have to do what I say. Tell me that you want to kiss me. Like I said, it is an uncomfortable scene. It is not a romantic scene of sex at all. Yeah, I mean, it can be debated whether or not it's assault. Maybe at face value it is, but I think symbolically as well, not to justify it. I'm not attempting to justify it. I'm saying symbolically, it is that disconnect of, is this a thing that I can use, or is this a human being with feelings and emotions and things like that? And I don't think he's experienced his humanity yet. I think he's still kind of cold, heartless Deckard at this point.
Right.
And much like in the book, really having sex with her doesn't necessarily change anything for better or for worse. So
yeah, no, that was good. And you made a good point with the fact that the fact that she is an android, because that does change things. But anyway,
well, and as a viewer, it changed things. It changed my things to be like, well, hey, this looks like a human. She's obviously scared. She's obviously resisting him.
Yeah.
Like to me, she's a human. You know, a robot wouldn't do those things.
Yeah.
You know, like, true. Yeah.
But so moving on to Roy and Pris and Leo, but you know, Leo dies, so we're not really going to talk about him too much.
He's kind of the heavy. He's kind of the goon of the,
yeah. But Roy and Pris go to see JF Sebastian, which he has like these creepy toys. Like, he's a likable character, but he's also just kind of creepy. Like, he ages quickly, so his skin is weird.
Methuselah
and then he lives
syndrome or something.
Yeah, and then he lives in this big house with all of these mannequins and fake toys, which I liked the vibe, but it's definitely kind of creepy. And so he takes them to see Tyrell. And so just this aspect where Roy in particular is wanting to meet his creator, and it seems like he's on one hand wanting answers, being like, why do we die after only 4 years? Like, why didn't you give us more time? Why didn't you, why do you treat us this way? This is what made me think of Prometheus, because that's a big part of Prometheus, is wanting to meet your creator, but then seeing that your creator doesn't care about you. So that seems like a common theme with Ridley Scott, with those two movies, that I think is really interesting. And Roy ends up killing Tyrell. And then I guess they kill Sebastian afterwards. We don't see it, but then Sebastian never shows up.
Kind of runs away in fear. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, maybe he runs away. But yeah, what do you think of the scene when he meets Tyrell?
Is it okay if we go back to the JF Sebastian real quick first?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I think that he's interesting because he was, unlike Isidore, he's very intelligent. His body's just breaking down. And they point out that, I think Pris even says, hey, you're a lot like us.
Yeah.
We're both gonna die young, I think it's interesting. So in the book, Pris is just a friend of Roy, and I thought it was interesting they made them lovers. Roy has a wife in the book.
Yeah, Irmgard.
Yeah, and so they're lovers. She was the captain calls her a pleasure model, so she was meant for essentially prostitution. And if you go into kind of the symbolism, we can talk about it later, of Roy and the nail through his hand, and kind of this Christ figure loving a sex worker, kind of like the Mary Magdalene of the story.
Right.
So there's interesting symbolism there. I do think it's interesting that you mentioned he's kind of creepy. He obviously had feelings for Pris. He was obviously attracted to her. He kind of, when he sees her, he like fixes his hair. He's very quick to be like, hey, come inside. I got food inside. Come on in, you know? And he's like, seems like a sweet guy, but also, a little creepy. He engineers his toys. And then there's almost this like uncomfortable jealousy when Roy shows up and he's like, oh my, you have a lot of toys here. And like, he almost doesn't even want to look at him when they start kissing or things like that.
Yeah.
And I love just going, and we can talk, I literally could talk for hours about Roy Batty and Rutger Hauer playing him. The fact that he is a little weird the whole film, he quotes poetry, which was Rutger Hauer's idea. One of the first things he says to another human is quoting poetry. He moves a little weird. When they kiss, it's like kind of weird and jerky and awkward. So it's like, he's able to preserve that, like, yes, he looks like a human, but he's a little weird. There's something off about him that's not quite lining up.
Yeah.
And I just think that that's brilliant. And in every scene he's in, going into kind of what we're talking about with Dr. Tyrell, defeats him in a game of chess in order to see him. And like you said, he meets his god and nothing changes. It almost makes things worse. And what I like is that he doesn't just come to Dr. Tyrell and say, hey, give me more life. Like, he actually has a plan. He's like, well, what if you genetically alter this? And Tyrell's like, we tried that. It doesn't work. And he's like, well, what if you do this? And he's like, well, that won't work either because, so he had, like, taken time to research and be like, hey, I'm going to come to my dad with a plan and he can give me more life. It's almost this idealism, that last shred of idealism or that faith that almost he had in his creator. When all of that ran out, he kills his own creator. He actually kisses him and then kills him. Which I think if we're going into the Judeo-Christian symbolism, it's kind of like almost like Judas and Jesus kissing, but also kind of that father-son relationship where it's like, yes, I am his child, but also he's got to go. I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like obviously Roy is a replicant, and yet he's having this very human experience being like, what is this point of my life? Why do I die? Why did God create us? And so he is like the most human character in some ways because of those feelings he's having.
Yes. Absolutely. The only one that really thinks about it at any length and is trying to do something about it. Everybody else is very black and white. Deckard has a job to do and he won't stop doing it. Rachel's just confused.
Yeah. And Pris is just kind of there.
Yeah, Pris is an interesting character, and I've heard some critiques of the film kind of say that she was very cardboard and very like kind of a background character.
Yeah.
If you look at her as a former kind of almost non-consensual sex worker in that context, she dresses herself up like a toy, almost like she was a toy to the officers or whoever used her services on Off-World. And then when she attacks Deckard, it's actually a very sexually violent position. She puts his head between her legs and is like squeezing him to death, and it's almost like these sexually violent things happen to me, and now I'm going to make you feel that too. And I thought that was, so there's more to her than just her kind of service, but she is in many ways a device for Roy's story arc.
Yeah, and to move on to Deckard, so they meet with Tyrell, and then they decide to go back to Sebastian's home, where Deckard knows they are, so he meets them there. Pris is pretending to be a mannequin, but then they end up fighting, and ultimately he ends up killing her. Yes. Which part of me, like we just saw Roy, which maybe Roy, they're a different model, so maybe he's stronger, because Roy was able to like squeeze Tyrell's head, whereas you would think Pris would have been able to kill Deckard with her strength, right? So I was kind of surprised she didn't kill him.
I'll have to check because it shows all their specifications when the police chief is showing him all the models. And Roy is strength level A and intelligence level A. And I believe Pris is strength level A and intelligence B. And then, but I'd have to go back and check. But yeah, maybe just going back, something I just thought of with the actual death, I did think it was interesting. He gouged his eyes out.
Yeah.
Because eyes are such a device in the film. The opening shot is of an eye.
Yeah. The Voight-Kamf.
Voight-Kamf scans your eye. The first guy he goes to see is Chu, who makes the eyes. He says, if I wish you could see what I've seen with your eyes, which I thought was an interesting line. And then we'll talk about it, but the I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
Like vision and eyes are a huge, so for him to defeat his god by gouging out his eyes, there's almost this personal, like, you're not allowed to see anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and Tyrell,
I'm the last thing you'll see before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also with vision, like Tyrell had a vision for replicants, right? And so, yeah, I did think the eye symbolism was really interesting. But yeah, so Deckard kills Pris. And then after this, Roy shows up and they sort of have this cat and mouse. Because there's times where it seems like Roy could have killed Deckard, but he just seems like he's messing with him a lot of the time.
Yeah, he starts howling like a wolf. I like the shot where he like busts his head through the wall and he's like, hey, I'm here,
Yeah.
There's almost this dark humor to the way he's acting. And I do think it goes into his line, it's quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it means to be a slave. And I think that he wanted Deckard to be just as frightened of Roy as the replicants were frightened of the Blade Runners.
So he doesn't want to just kill him easily. He wants to have him scared and be chasing him
because
and confusing him.
In a hand-to-hand fight, I think Roy would have blown him away.
Yeah, and this fight culminates, well, before we talk about like the last scene, like you said, there's a part where he stabs his hand, Roy Batty does.
Yes.
And so obviously I thought of a Christ reference, but I didn't know if that's all it was or if there was something more to it. But how did you interpret that?
So interestingly enough, the first shot we see, other than his picture, the first shot we see of Roy is his hand crumpling up, and he says, "Time enough." And then the last thing he ever speaks in the film is "time to die," which we can get into that. But it's established that his hand is starting to kind of go a little wrong, that's the first sign of him dying. Dr. Tyrell says, like, hey, you were supposed to live 4 years. I can tell you've been, like, kind of burning your candle on both ends, so you're going to die much sooner. So Roy is, like, very aware that his mortality is imminent. And I do think that was... So physically, he put it in to kind of keep his hand open so it wouldn't close up. He sticks the nail through his hand. I do think that there is a savior symbolism in it.
He dies, sacrifices himself.
There's the dove, which is definitely a biblical symbol. The fact that in a reading of the Bible, Jesus Christ, his existence caused a lot of problems. It wasn't this necessarily this happy time in Jerusalem. Jesus showing up and teaching the things he taught caused a lot of problems politically, things like that. So the existence of a savior, and not just Jesus, but any type of savior, is often an uncomfortable experience. And I think that that's what they were getting at with Roy.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah. And then Deckard, he tries to jump to another building, but he falls. Well, he doesn't fall. He's barely hanging on. Roy jumps over, and of course he makes the jump. Yeah. And then you would think he would make Deckard fall, but instead he picks him up and lifts him onto the building, which Deckard, I did think Harrison Ford was good here, because this whole time he just looks so confused, being like, what is going on right now? And it also gets to the point where he's no longer, before all of this, where he's no longer trying to kill Roy, he's just trying to get away.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so then he's sitting there after he's saved by Roy, and this is when Roy does his monologue about how all of these things that I have seen, all of these memories and these experiences I've had, and the famous line, now they're just gonna disappear like tears in the rain, I think is the line.
I actually have it committed to memory, so I'd be happy to share it with you.
Yeah.
But so before we get into that, though, so a little film production history there. So Rutger Hauer actually makes the jump in one shot. It's one scene. He jumps between the two buildings. The buildings were set apart, and he had 3 stuntmen attempt it and fall, and it was a 30-foot drop on the set. Rutger Hauer was like, hey, if you move it a couple feet in, I bet you I could make that jump. So that's really Rutger Hauer making the jump in one shot. Ridley Scott, his biggest struggle was this was the first time he shot with an American film crew. And I guess in England, there weren't a lot of rules with unions and stuff. And the Americans were very insistent on taking their breaks. And so they would do these long, elaborate scenes that people were getting warmed up for. And then the film crew would be like, oh, break time. Sorry, shut it down. So I guess they only had about 45 minutes left before a mandatory break. And so that's why Rutger Hauer was like, I'll just do it. Just let me jump. And so he jumped and he delivers, I've seen things that you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I've watched C-beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All these moments will be lost in time, like tears in the rain. Time to die. Oof,
nice.
Great.
Yeah. And then his time just expires, and then he dies right after saying that.
Something else I really liked is that it's raining, and Deckard is scared, and you can't tell if he's crying. So it's almost this direct, they're going to be lost, like your tears in this rain.
Yeah.
What I think is beautiful about this monologue, and that makes it so iconic, is that Rachel really struggled with, hey, what's a false memory and what did I really experience? And Roy is so confident. He's like, I've actually seen these things. You wouldn't believe it. I've been in these battles. I've seen these marvelous things that you'll never experience. You know? And I think that there's a beauty to his humanity came from being able to rely on his own experiences and not what he was programmed to be. And so So there's an interview, and I can send you the link because it cracks me up. There's an interview with Rutger Hauer shortly after the film was made, and the lady does not understand his character at all. And she goes, "Now, Rutger, you're an extremely attractive man. Why were you the villain?" And I think that's funny. It's very 80s. Like, the hot guy has to be the good guy
hero.
always. And so he says, "Well, I don't think he's a villain. I think he was he doesn't really, in a nutshell, he doesn't really start doing violent things until he's pursued. He's really just trying to survive up until that point where someone's chasing him. And then this monster gets unleashed." So I thought that was interesting that is he the villain of the film? Because he doesn't really come across as a villain in my mind. And I think the androids in the book were more cold and heartless than the replicants are here, for sure. Oh, and
Rachel, obviously, too, is
a lot more sympathetic, more humanity. I really like Rachel's one of my favorites in the movie.
Yeah.
Where she wasn't in the book, I didn't really care for her that much in the book. The pejorative term for replicants is skin jobs in Blade Runner, which I thought, so they're Andes in Do Androids Dream, and skin jobs in that's like their derogatory term for them.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, in a text you talked about why they're called Blade Runners. Did you want to share, because I was curious, why are bounty hunters called Blade Runners?
So that's a production thing. Is they thought that people would be confused by the line, "Do androids dream of electric sheep?" And so they were going through the properties that they actually owned rights to. And one of the writers saw that they owned rights to a short story called Blade Runners, which was about a dystopian society, but medical supplies were in short supply. And so that was almost like their black market drugs was medicine. And so the Blade Runners were the people who smuggled scalpels or blades to other people. So that's what a Blade Runner was in the context of a completely different short story. What Ridley Scott had said was that he felt a Blade Runner meant that they were walking a thin line between being human and being inhuman. So they're on that blade.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
And then moving on to the very end of the movie, so Deckard returns home, Rachel is there. Also, he sees Gaff, and Gaff makes a comment about how, something like, "Rachel's a pretty lady, too bad, she's going to die because she's an android," essentially.
It's a pity she won't live, but then again, who does?
Yeah, that's what it was.
Gaff is interesting. We kind of glossed over Gaff. He's an interesting guy.
Yeah, and we can talk about him more right here because specifically in the theater release, he has another scene. But anyway, so in the final cut version, he and Rachel decide to leave and go live their own life essentially. And on his way out, he sees the origami figure, which Gaff is always making. So that means Gaff is there. And I took that to mean Gaff knows that Rachel is there, knows that he's with Rachel, and he is going to find them and he's going to retire Rachel. But from there, the movie ends. And so we don't know what happens. Yes. Whereas in the theatrical release, test audiences thought the movie was too confusing, and so the production company had Harrison Ford come back and film a voiceover to add, which is notoriously bad because Harrison Ford didn't want the voiceover, and so he just made it really cheesy and bad.
Have you heard the voiceover recordings?
I've heard clips of it, and it sounds terrible.
He'll literally, a scene will happen, and then he'll explain what's in the scene. So if we were shooting this scene, we would end this conversation, and then my voiceover would be like, "Yeah, I just talked to Laura, and we talked about Blade Runner." And it's yeah, I know, I just saw it. I just watched that part.
Yeah, and so it's not even reflective of his thoughts. Yeah. It's telling us what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. It's narrating, yeah.
And they also tagged on this dumb Hollywood happy ending where they leave the building and then he and Rachel are driving, and in voiceover we hear that he and Rachel escaped, and even though she was only supposed to live 4 years, somehow she lived longer, and now they've lived happily ever after, and Gaff was downstairs, but he lets them go free, basically, is the theater ending, which is so cheesy.
And the helicopter shots of the forest they're driving through is actually leftover footage from The Shining.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's a cool tie-in.
Yeah. Yeah, he says something about maybe Gaff was right. Maybe she will only live 4 years, but then again, who knows? Which Gaff literally just said that. So
yeah.
It's it almost ending on Gaff's "she won't live, but who does." To me, when I first saw it, I thought too, hey, Gaff was giving him a warning, hey, you better run. But I almost see it as, because we don't know how long Gaff was standing there, because he's just there. You see his ship land, and he's just there. So you don't know how much of the interaction between Roy. You'd think that a Blade Runner, if I was watching a Blade Runner work, why didn't he just shoot him? So he sees that there's interaction. I feel like Gaff saw Rachel as retired as a replicant once Harrison Ford learned humanity and learned to treat her like a human being. And so figuratively, she was retired as a replicant because he wanted to be with her and love her.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you like that movie ending with them going off together? And it's ambiguous. Like, we don't know if they survive. We don't know how long she lives. Apparently, maybe he's an android too, but...
Yeah, and the second film kind of picks up, or the Blade Runner 2049 picks up and kind of answers what happens.
Which, yeah, I did want to ask you about that. Yeah. Because I keep meaning to watch that movie ever since it came out, and I keep not watching it.
Yeah.
So without getting too heavy into spoilers, I did want to hear your thoughts about that and how it relates to this one.
Essentially, in a nutshell, Ryan Gosling is a Blade Runner. They've actually, there's a new corporation that takes over after Tyrell dies. A man named, who's that weird dude that played Joker?
Jared Leto?
Jared Leto is, I don't remember, but it's a new corporation. I'm blanking on the name right now. I apologize. So he takes over the replicate process, actually like improves on the implanted memories and makes all the replicants a lot more compliant. So they're more robotic and they feel a lot less. So Ryan Gosling is a Blade Runner. The first replicant he encounters is John Baptista. It's just this huge man and they have this epic fight. And so essentially the crux of it is they find a corpse of a replicant that had been buried, which was very rare because replicants don't get funerals. So like, well, who's this replicant? They established that it's a woman. She had given birth, and they're trying to find the child of this human replicant hybrid. There is, without too many spoilers, it's marvelous CGI of Sean Young as she is in 1982 makes an appearance in the new film, and the way they did it, it was just perfect. It was great CGI and just really impressive to see. And then Ryan Gosling does a great job, and that film explores more of the world that Philip K. Dick had, where they do talk about the irradiated areas that are all dusty, because dust is a big thing in the books it's always raining in the movies.
Yeah.
Which is like to imply that the weather's all messed up. But he goes to a place that's like, hey, warning, this place is still irradiated, be careful, and things like that. So it does still build on that world. It's a great tie-in. I like Blade Runner, the first Blade Runner, better, but it is also a good movie. And Harrison Ford is in it again. And apparently on day one, picked up the same fight that he had been fighting with Ridley Scott in 1982. Just picked up I love that level of pettiness in Harrison Ford. Yeah. That they stop an argument in 1982, and then in the 2010s, he picks it right back up.
Wow, that's good. So I guess we can get to book first movie, unless you had any final movie thoughts.
No, I think we covered most of it. It's a great film, great acted. Rutger Hauer does great. Harrison Ford, Sean Young, Edward James Olmos is Gaff.
Yeah.
I do think the world building was fascinating to me. That, interestingly enough, there are a few things in the narrated version that do explain some of the expanded world. So Gaff speaks a language that's like a mixture of like Chinese, Japanese, German. He's such an interesting, he's a reflection of that world. Like, he's a person definitely from that world that kind of allows us to compare and bounce the other Blade Runners and the other replicants off of kind of like, it's firmly established that this guy is from this world. And this is,
what's
allows for that.
And,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so book versus movie.
Yeah, so you like the movie better.
I do. A lot, yeah.
Right. And then just in summary, what is it about the movie that you think is better than the book?
So I will.
And what were your issues with the book?
I will start. I think it's a good book. I think that in terms of palpability, the movie, you did say it was a simplified plot. I will concede partially to that. I think that there's a lot of symbolism, but maybe that's just the type of person that I am, that I'm looking for symbolism and everything. And so I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. That might just be my replicant brain. What I liked about the book, I liked that it was set in San Francisco, but that's just because I live closer to San Francisco, so I was able to imagine a San Francisco a little better than it would if the book were in LA. I've been to LA, but San Francisco is more of an intimate location for me. And so I did like that. I guess what I liked better about the movie was the deeper exploration of the humanity of the replicants and the fact that they didn't go down easy. They all fought pretty hard, with the exception maybe of Leo, who kind of got ambushed by Rachel. They all, it took forever to kill Zora. She was crashing through all those windows and he kept shooting at her. Pris was a pretty hard kill. Roy, was not killed by a Blade Runner. He died on his own terms. I guess I just, in general, liked the replicants better than their android counterparts in the book. I think the world building in the book was brilliant. I found the character of Deckard more likable in the film, and I guess a lot of the criterion on which I assess movies is how relatable the characters are to me, and maybe that's not a fair assessment, but that's like, I could see things in myself that were like Roy. I could see things in myself that were like Deckard. I could see things in myself, attitudes that were like Rachel. So it's like there was more of an emotional impact than a bounty hunter that's like sleeps with androids to be able to kill them, doesn't like his wife that much, obsessed with buying an animal. Like he wasn't as relatable a character as many of the characters in the book. Or in the movie. In the movie, yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting because you said in the movie, the replicants, like, they do not go down easy and they fight for their lives. Whereas that's a huge change, because in the book, it says specifically that when an android is faced with death, they will just accept it and be like, okay, do what you gotta do.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, they're more like psychopaths in a lot of ways, where they use people and they manipulate them, and, they injure the spider just to see what would happen, not necessarily because they want to hurt it, but they just lack the empathy.
They're devoid of feelings. They're not malicious. They're just they don't feel. They're machines.
They don't value their lives necessarily, and they don't value others' lives, and so that's a huge change from book to movie. And I will say, originally, before this conversation, I was definitely like, I like the book better. I think it gives you more to think about, and I liked the religion aspect. I liked the electric animals. I liked the mood organ and the empathy boxes and all of that. And it also is one where there is a lot of obvious symbolism. But then, like you said, the movie definitely has symbolism, but maybe it's not subtle, but maybe it just wasn't as obvious to me, I guess. Whereas the book, it's like clearly being like, this is happening, and clearly it means something. So you need to think about it and figure it out.
Yeah, and Mercerism was incredibly interesting. And I think I had, in the book, that was what I thought about the most, was the aspect of Mercerism. I don't know how realistically they could tie that into the film without making it weird. And maybe that would have been cool maybe in Blade Runner 2049, but maybe if there's a Blade Runner 2089, Ridley, if you're watching this, give me a call. No.
Yeah, and like I said, I do think it was smart for the movie to just get rid of some of that extra stuff, because it works in a book, and the book is a bit more abstract too, and so it would be harder to translate into film. So ultimately, this conversation has made me appreciate the movie more than I originally did. I think on Letterboxd, I gave it like 3 stars. Okay. But after this, I'm bumping it up to 4.
Nice, excellent, cool.
This is a tough one. Ultimately, I kind of want to say I still do like the book better.
I mean, you are why the book wins, so I get it.
Yeah. But I do like the movie. Also, maybe because, like I said, I'd watched it in the past, and yet I had like almost no memory of it, so it wasn't one that stuck with me. However, I think now, after getting so in-depth into it, which is one reason why I like doing this show, is because it forces me to stay with a book and a story so long and really think about it and really appreciate it more too, rather than just dismissing it and moving on. So yeah, and it was great having you on for this one, because you love the movie so much and are knowledgeable with the book, so you definitely gave me a greater appreciation for the movie, but the book too. So
excellent. Cool.
It's a close one, but I gave the book 4 stars too, so I'm giving them both the same star rating, but I think I would almost be more likely to reread the book than to watch the movie again, ultimately.
You don't want to watch all 7 iterations of Blade Runner?
Which, we talked about the theatrical release and the final cut, but there's also the international version. There's the director's cut.
Made
which
for
actually,
TV. Yeah.
But the one Ridley Scott had like full control over is the final cut. So that is the one.
Yeah, director's cut's kind of a misnomer, because he actually did not like it.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah. Did you have any other final thoughts?
No, I think we covered everything. Blade Runner's awesome.
Yeah. So thank you again, Preston, for coming on the show. It was awesome talking to you about this.
Thank you.
If you have any other book first movies you want to discuss, definitely reach out, and you can be a reoccurring guest we can have on here.
Excellent. I'd love that.
And thank you to everyone listening and watching. If you were on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe, give this a thumbs up, comment down below your thoughts. And again, like the thought of Rick being a replicant, like if people have other thoughts on that with the movie, definitely comment down below. Comment down below the symbolism of the book and how you interpret a lot of that, because I think a lot of it is up to our own individual interpretation with so many of the things.
And I agree, having been raised in a religious home, I'm going to see symbols of Jesus everywhere.
Yeah.
Versus someone maybe who doesn't have that background. So I would love to hear other people's thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. So again, thank you, Preston, and thank you everybody for watching and listening, and I will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you, Laura. Bye.